Picture yourself right inside the acoustic intro of Blow Up the Outside World. You hear it, right? It's just this clean, blues-inflected, almost lullaby-like guitar pattern. It feels incredibly intimate, just quiet.
It does. And, if you have any familiarity with Soundgarden, your brain is immediately telling you that something is entirely different about this setup.
Yeah, I mean, it feels completely backward to me. Usually when I think of a classic Soundgarden track, it is built on this foundation of massive, crushing, odd-meter guitar riffs.
Right, exactly.
Like, that's the stuff their lead guitarist Kim Sale is famous for. But this song, it seems like it is built entirely around Chris Cornell's vocal melody. It feels way closer to a classic singer-songwriter structure than, heavy Seattle sludge.
That is the exact inversion taking place. I mean, Cornell completely flipped the script on how they constructed a song. And the musical architecture he used to do it is, well, it's deceptively simple.
Okay, how so?
If we look under the hood of the verses, it is really just an oscillation between an E major chord and a C major chord.
But why does that simple back and forth feel so unsettling? Like, even before the heavy guitars come in, there is this profound feeling of dread. It doesn't feel like a happy acoustic song at all.
Right, and that feeling of dread comes down to the musicology of those two specific chords. Cornell is relying on a concept called modal mixture, and specifically, he is using what we call borrowed chords.
Okay, wait, stop there. For those of us who skipped music theory, what does it mean to borrow a chord? Like, what is he borrowing from?
Think of a song's musical key like a neighborhood. In a standard rock song played in the key of E major, there are certain chords that just live in that neighborhood.
Right.
You expect the progression to follow what's called the traditional circle of fifths. Your ear naturally expects the song to move predictably to no-brain chords like A major or B major. When it does that, your brain feels a sense of resolution. It feels safe.
So if I'm listening to a standard 90s rock song in E major, my brain is already anticipating those safe, predictable chords.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But Cornell completely subverts that expectation. Instead of going to A or B, he drops in that C major chord.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and in music theory, that is a flat 6 chord. It does not belong in the E major neighborhood. He actually borrowed it from the parallel key of E minor.
So it's like a stranger suddenly showing up at a family dinner. You don't know why they are there, and it just puts everybody slightly on edge.
That is a perfect way to look at it. That minor third jump from E to C creates this unstable, melancholic tension right beneath the surface.
Yeah, you really feel that.
It's a tonal center that never lets you feel fully comfortable, which perfectly matches the psychological theme of the song.
And it's not just the chords doing that work, is it? I mean, it's the physical execution of the song's dynamics. They push the quiet, loud structure to its absolute limit here.
They really do.
In those verses, you have these dry, almost murmuring vocals. It sounds like he's whispering to himself in an empty room. But then the chorus hits.
Oh, and the chorus introduces F sharp major, B, G, and A type chords. The distortion pedals click on, the drums absolutely open up, and it creates this incredible wall of sound.
It goes from total isolation to a massive, multi-tracked, cathartic outburst. Which brings up a huge question. How does a band at the absolute pinnacle of global fame, selling millions of records, end up writing a masterpiece about wanting to completely disappear? You're listening to Deep Cuts and Deep Thinking.
Well said.
We are exploring the sources behind Soundgarden's 1996 album, Down on the Upside. This is a deep dive into how profound physical burnout, shifting creative power, and a desperate search for authenticity reshaped a band at their absolute commercial peak.
Yeah, and to really understand why Cornell needed that sonic sanctuary, we have to look at the physical and emotional damage the previous 2 years inflicted on him and the rest of the band. You have to trace the collapse that followed their previous masterpiece.
Right, because on paper, the era following their album Super Unknown looked like a dream come true for any rock band.
On paper, it was a staggering peak. Super Unknown was released on March 8th, 1994. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200.
Wow.
It sold 310,000 copies in its opening week alone. It eventually hit 6 times platinum in the United States. I mean, they were ubiquitous on MTV and radio. They had won.
But the reality on the ground was brutal, wasn't it? The tour for that album lasted 2 years. What does a 2-year world tour actually do to a human body?
It breaks it down entirely. The physical toll was devastating. Cornell actually suffered vocal cord hemorrhaging while they were touring in Australia.
Wait, hemorrhaging, like his throat was bleeding. How did that even happen to a singer?
It happens from sheer mechanical overuse. When you are singing that aggressively night after night, the vocal folds are slamming against each other thousands of times a minute.
Ouch. That sounds awful.
It is. Without enough rest, the blood vessels inside those folds literally burst. They had to cancel shows just to prevent permanent, career-ending damage to his voice.
That is terrifying. And, on top of the physical breakdown, there was a massive psychological toll. In April 1994, right as their album was exploding, Kurt Cobain died by suicide.
Yes. And that event cast a massive, dark shadow over the entire Seattle scene. Soundgarden was right in the middle of it.
Yeah, they were losing friends.
Exactly. They were losing friends, they were physically exhausted, and they were trapped in the machinery of a massive global tour.
So by the time they finally reconvened in July 1995 to start writing new material, they were battered. And that led to a radical decision about how they were going to record the next album, Down on the Upside.
They violently rejected the process that made them superstars. For Super Unknown, they worked with a producer named Michael Beinhorn, who drove them to agonizing perfectionism.
Oh, right, the microscopic tweaking.
Yeah, they spent days just microscopically calibrating guitar tones. It drained the life out of them. So when the tracking window opened from November 1995 to February 1996, They fired Beinhorn.
Good for them.
They moved between Studio Litho and Bad Animals in Seattle, and they decided to self-produce alongside an engineer named Adam Kasper.
And I read that they kept the entire recording process purely analog. The sources refer to it as AD format. I'm not an audio engineer, so what does AD actually mean for you as a listener putting on the headphones?
It means analog recording, analog mixing, and digital mastering. Practically, it means they were recording onto physical magnetic tape, not into a computer.
Got it.
Today, if a drummer is slightly off beat, a producer just drags the audio file on a screen to snap it to a perfect digital grid. You couldn't easily do that with tape.
So they were forced to leave the humanity in the music.
Exactly. They intentionally left mistakes in. You hear high-frequency audio feedback, the tempos push and pull naturally, the guitars are occasionally slightly out of tune. They kept all of it to preserve the kinetic energy of humans playing in a room.
You'd think stripping away the perfectionist producer and just getting in a room together with some analog tape would unify them, right? Like going back to their garage days as kids. Did this quest for rawness actually bring the band together, or did it just expose the cracks?
You would think it brought them together, but ironically, this streamlined workflow actually did the exact opposite. It deeply isolated the band members from one another.
Why? If they were self-producing, shouldn't they be collaborating more?
Because they weren't spending months painfully jamming out parts together in the studio like they used to. To save time, and honestly to avoid grueling studio arguments, members just worked in isolation at their own houses.
Oh, I see.
They brought fully completed home demos to the tracking sessions.
Oh, wow. So instead of building a house together using the same blueprint, it's like 4 guys building separate rooms in their own backyards and trying to tape them together later.
That is a brilliant way to picture it. The creative democracy basically dissolved. The writing became heavily dominated by Chris Cornell and their bassist, Ben Shepherd.
Which leaves out Kim Thayil.
Yes, this deeply marginalized their lead guitarist. Kim Thayil only wrote one fully realized track for the entire album, a song called Never the Machine Forever, which is in a punishing 9/8 time signature.
Wow, just one song.
Just one. Thayil wanted to preserve the band's heavy metal riffs, but Cornell was insisting on steering them toward lighter, acoustic-driven melodies that he was writing alone.
So we have this fractured, isolated creative environment. Everyone is in their own corner. And that isolation is the direct soil from which Blow Up the Outside World grew. Let's look at how Cornell used his lyrics and his vocal architecture on this track to construct what is essentially a psychological panic room.
The lyrical analysis here reveals so much about Cornell's headspace at the time. Look at the very first lyric, "Nothing seems to kill me no matter how hard I try."
It sounds so fatalistic.
It is a brilliant paradox. On the surface, it sounds like a boast of invulnerability, but beneath that, it is masking deep, bone-weary exhaustion.
Yeah, it's not a superhero landing. It's the sound of someone who's just so tired of the act of surviving. But you know, a lot of people hear the title, Blow Up the Outside World, and they assume it's an angry song, like a call for literal violence or anarchy.
Right, but it isn't about aggression at all. It's about a desperate desire for a sanctuary. Cornell himself explained that the song was about the urge to hibernate.
To just shut down.
Exactly. It is about removing external pressures so they simply stop encroaching on your mind. It's about blowing up the noise, the demands, and the expectations of the public.
I really appreciate how the track completely rejects those toxic positivity, self-help platitudes that people always throw at you when you're struggling. There's that line in the song, someone tried to tell me something, don't let the world bring you down, and immediately follows it with, nothing will do me in before I do myself.
It is a hauntingly direct acknowledgement of his internal struggle.
He's basically saying, you know, keep your bumper sticker advice. My demons are already inside the house. And to deliver a line like that, you need a very specific voice. We have to talk about how he physically executed this performance. Because Cornell's vocal range is legendary. It's documented as a 4-octave range from C2 all the way up to A5.
It is a staggering physical instrument. And what is fascinating is how he deploys that instrument to mirror the psychological struggle of the lyrics.
Yeah, the contrast is huge.
He uses a highly controlled mid-register baritone for the verses. It sounds conversational, almost resigned. But then he shifts to a high, distorted mixed voice for the massive choruses.
But how does he do that high, distorted screaming without tearing his vocal cords again? You just mentioned he was hemorrhaging a year prior.
Well, from a technical standpoint, his execution on this record is incredibly healthy. Vocal coaches who study Cornell point out that he uses a technique called simultaneous onsets.
What does a simultaneous onset actually mean for the muscles in your throat?
Think of your vocal cords like a pair of saloon doors. If you push a massive gust of air out of your lungs before opening those doors, they slam open violently.
And that causes the damage.
Exactly. A simultaneous onset means your breath and your vocal tone start at the exact same millisecond. The air and the muscle coordination are perfectly synced.
Oh, that makes sense.
This technique allows him to produce that gritty, aggressive distortion with absolute clarity without grinding his vocal cords together. He is delivering maximum emotional catharsis with perfect mechanical precision.
It really is a masterclass in using your body as an instrument. And the public clearly resonated with it. The song was released as the 3rd single on December 16th, 1996. It was a massive hit.
Huge hit.
It peaked at #1 on the Billboard Mainstream Rock chart, staying there for 4 weeks, and it hit #8 on the Modern Rock chart.
And if you watch the music video they put out for this, it perfectly matches that feeling of being trapped. It was directed by Gerald Casale, who was a co-founder of the band Devo. He used this intense dystopian imagery, heavily inspired by the film A Clockwork Orange. You see Cornell subjected to clinical, military-style behavioral conditioning.
Yeah, he's strapped into a chair, forced to watch flashing monitors. It is a very literal visual representation of being completely overwhelmed by external systemic pressure.
Exactly.
But, stepping back and looking at the song itself within the landscape of the mid-90s, this melodic, highly vulnerable track feels miles away from the heavy grunge scene they helped invent. They were the architects of Seattle sludge.
Was Cornell intentionally trying to pivot Soundgarden into a Britpop phase? Was he trying to be Noel Gallagher here?
He wasn't trying to pivot into Britpop, no. But you are hitting on a crucial underlying influence. Cornell and the band were leaning heavily into classic Beatles and folk rock influences.
Cornell specifically cited the Beatles come together as a touchstone for other tracks on this album. What Blow Up the Outside World did was build a bridge. It connected the aggressive early Seattle grunge sound with the more introspective, melody-driven alternative rock that was about to dominate the late 90s.
It proved you didn't have to just play loud power chords to be heavy.
Exactly. It proved you didn't have to sacrifice intellectual rigor or emotional subtlety just to play heavy rock music.
But this desire to escape the outside world wasn't just a lyrical fantasy for Chris Cornell. It was a real-time reflection of the band's deteriorating relationship with the music industry. And it led directly to one of rock's most infamous implosions.
Yes, the breakup. And if we connect this album's tone to the breakup, we have to bust a major myth that still surrounds Soundgarden.
The sequel myth.
Right. Fans and critics often retrospectively look at the album title, Down on the Upside, and its somber, isolated tones, and they assume it was a calculated sequel to Super Unknown or a deliberate swan song.
People assume the band knew they were breaking up and wrote a farewell letter.
Yes, but they didn't know this was the end. Historical investigation clarifies that the Swan Song narrative is entirely a critic-originated legend. Even the title wasn't some grand conceptual statement about falling apart.
Oh.
The phrase "down on the upside" was extracted at the absolute last minute from a lyric in the song Dusty, simply because the label was demanding a name for the CD packaging.
Wow, just to meet a deadline.
Yeah. The band members viewed the record as a natural boundary-pushing progression. In fact, during these very sessions, Kim Thale and drummer Matt Cameron were actively discussing plans for their next album.
So what changed? If they were planning the next record, why did it all fall apart so quickly?
We have to look at the industry squeeze. The external pressures on the band were shifting massively. The alternative rock landscape in 1996 was changing rapidly.
Oh, right. Because the raw, artistic grunge sound was losing mainstream ground to glossier post-grunge bands and highly produced pop-punk.
Right. The musical climate was shifting underneath them. And it wasn't just the musical climate, it was the corporate climate. Their label, A&M Records, was undergoing severe corporate restructuring at the exact same time.
Parent companies were shifting, executives were turning over.
Yes. And when executives turn over, they want to prove their worth. The label put immense top-down pressure on Soundgarden to deliver a massive commercial smash hit.
Because the executives needed a guaranteed win to secure their end-of-year bonuses in a volatile corporate environment, right?
Exactly. The label wasn't interested in the band's analog acoustic experiments or their desire for artistic evolution. The label just wanted another Black Hole Sun. They wanted the profitable machine to keep running.
And all of that internal creative fatigue, combined with this massive external industry pressure, finally boiled over during their world tour. Let's set the scene for the final moment. It is February 9th, 1997.
The Honolulu climax.
Right. This is the final stop of the tour, playing at the Blaisdell Arena in Honolulu, Hawaii. The band is completely exhausted. The onstage energy has been described by crew members as mechanical and detached for weeks. And during the Honolulu show, bassist Ben Shepherd suffers severe monitor failures.
Right. The monitors are the speakers facing the band so they can hear themselves play. Shepherd's equipment keeps cutting out entirely. He is essentially playing blind, or rather deaf.
And it becomes the breaking point. In a final act of absolute frustration, Shepherd loses his temper, throws his bass guitar high into the air, and just storms off the stage. He's completely done.
He was. The rest of the band eventually retreats as well. But Cornell walks back out onto the stage alone. He stays to finish the show with a solo acoustic set, and Matt Cameron eventually comes back out to help him on drums.
Just a really sad image.
It is. After the show, they fly back to Seattle in total silence. 2 months later, on April 9th, 1997, the official disbandment of Soundgarden is announced to the press.
As a music fan, I know we all love a cinematic, explosive ending. We love the narrative of a singular, dramatic fight that ends it all. The thrown bass guitar that shattered a legendary band.
It makes for a good story.
It does, but I have to challenge that narrative based on everything we've discussed. Did a thrown bass guitar and a bad monitor mix in Hawaii truly cause the breakup of Soundgarden, or was it just a symptom of a terminal illness?
All the evidence points to it being a symptom. The broken bass guitar was just the final straw on a camel's back that was already pulverized. As Matt Cameron plainly stated years later when reflecting on the breakup, they were simply eaten up by the business.
Eaten up by the business, that says it all.
It really does. The breakup was the inevitable collapse of an exhausted creative ecosystem. They didn't break up because of one bad show. They broke up because the machinery of the music industry had ground their collaborative spirit into dust.
So what does this all mean for you, listening right now? Let's distill the key takeaways from this deep dive. First, Down on the upside stand as a raw, fiercely independent reaction to the polished, exhausting machine of super unknown.
Yes, it was a band refusing to repeat themselves, insisting on analog imperfection, even if that stubbornness cost them their unity.
And second, Blow Up the Outside World perfectly encapsulates this entire complex era. It is a masterpiece that fused theoretical musical complexity, those brilliant borrowed chords and shifting dynamics, with the raw emotional vulnerability of a singer-songwriter who is desperate for sanctuary.
Absolutely.
And that is exactly where this connects directly back to you, because we all face immense external pressures, the demands of our jobs, the constant unyielding noise of the digital world, the expectations of the people around us.
It can be overwhelming.
It really can. And sometimes the desire to blow up the outside world isn't a negative, destructive impulse at all. Sometimes it is just a necessary, healthy craving to set strict boundaries, to carve out a quiet space, your own psychological panic room, just for your own survival.
The music industry demanded that Soundgarden never stop being a massive, profitable hit-making machine. Chris Cornell's response to that impossible pressure was to write a beautiful, melancholic song about simply closing the door.
So I want to leave you with a final reflection to mull over today. If Chris Cornell's intense need for isolation and boundary setting was the exact catalyst that produced his most sophisticated and emotionally resonant songwriting, how often do you stifle your own creative breakthroughs by refusing to tune out the external noise? If you like this episode, please support the show by liking and subscribing.